Hey guys, and welcome back to the mudstudsskullcaps podcast. I'm Robin.
And I'm Kelsey. And in today's episode, we're going to tackle the question of how often should I ride? And if I ride, what should I be working on? Guys, if you haven't already, go back and check out last week's episode where we discussed some common faults our trainers are always asking us to fix and some exercises to fix them. And if you're listening on that Apple Podcast app, feel free to leave a review. One of the ways that podcast app algorithm ranks podcasts is based on its age. So we are competing with a lot older podcasts that may not even be active anymore or haven't been posting new content in a couple years. So leaving those reviews allows that algorithm to know that this is an active podcast, that it does put out dedicated content and is posting regularly, and that will help us get higher when people are searching things like horses and horse training in that Apple Podcast app. So go ahead, leave us a review so that Apple knows we're out here, we're real, and that we should rank a little bit higher in that search function.
Yes, definitely. And we really honestly, truly appreciate every one of you that leaves a review. And to get into today's topic of how often should you ride your horse, I just want to start off with how frustrating of a topic this is to Google. If you Google any of it, I would say a lot of the first articles that come up, there's a lot of misinformation going on. And one of the first articles that came up for me, I clicked on it and was reading through it just because I wanted to see what other people's opinions were and what they were saying. And this one lady was saying that younger horses should be worked more often. And I was like, okay, sure. And then I saw the age range that she put, and it was 2 to 3 year olds should be ridden 3 times hard a week.
Oh.
And if that's the first article coming up that people are reading, that's really concerning.
Yeah, I would definitely find a different article. Yeah, your 2 to 3 year olds probably should be in very light work.
Right?
I guess that must just be like a feeling of too much energy and that you're trying to like wear them down.
I don't know. I was so confused, and it's just frustrating how much information, I don't know, it just felt like very misinformation that can be very misleading to certain people that they think they're reading something reputable and might go out and try to apply that.
No, I mean, when we're talking about how often you should ride your horses and how much you should, work them, what kind of work you should do, there's lots of things to take into consideration. But then I also know a lot of us are asking that question because we're busy. I had a friend ask me the other day, how often are you riding your horse? We both work full time. We both have, busy lives, long hours, lots of things we're doing. And she was asking because, she sometimes feels bad that she's not able to get to the barn every day or that she's only going, a couple times a week. And I think this is where we really struggle is a lot of us want to do the best thing for our horse. And I think sometimes we confuse riding our horse with doing the best thing for our horse. And that's something that frustrates me is that horses don't have to be ridden to be happy. There's a lot of things that you can do. I know I have horses that love to work and love to be exercised, and I have horses that don't want anything to do with work. So a lot of it depends on your horse. It depends on their living situation, their age, their health, what kind of goals you guys have set. So there's a lot of factors to consider when how much I should ride my horse. And also, I think your time, how much time you have, is an important factor to consider.
Yeah, because I know growing up and stuff is that I felt almost guilt-tripped if I wasn't working my horse a certain number of times a week or if I wasn't having long enough rides, because you're constantly pushed that you have this idea of a 60-minute ride. Your ride must be 60 minutes. If it's not, why are you riding? And I think just kind of getting away from those, not stereotypes, but just the norms that are pushed on us, getting away from that. Because, riding your horse is not the only way to spend time and give your horse attention. You can work them in hand. You can do other types of work with them, mental exercises and stuff that is just as beneficial to them as riding. You don't always have to ride, and you don't have to feel guilty if you're not riding. People always say that someone's wasting their horse's potential, and that's BS.
Yeah, the goal should be that your horse should live as natural of a life as possible. So I highly, highly promote all horses to live in pastures, or to live outside as much as they can. Because I think that's a big factor in how much I should ride is your horse's living situation. But at least my horses, and most of the horses I haven't been around like to engage their brains and do interesting new things. They're curious animals, and you should use that curiosity to your advantage. And that doesn't mean you have to, plow out this same 60-minute ride every single time you go there. And I feel like when we were in high school and younger, that was a lot of what we were doing. It was like, okay, 60 minutes, that means I walk 5 minutes this direction, then 5 minutes that direction, and that means I trot and I do these 10 figures, and I practice this part of my dressage test. And like, it was just so like, boom, 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 this is what you did every time you rode. And I just don't think that was using our horses' brains fully and like giving them the best. And especially like a lot of times if you're busy and you're pinched for time, you don't need to get there and push out a really quick rushed ride where you don't have time to focus, or like there's other things you can do instead of just racing through a quick dressage school that honestly doesn't get you anywhere. That's sometimes these rides and these exercises don't actually get you anywhere.
Well, I follow this one girl on Instagram, and she recently just went and did a stay overseas with Oliver Townsend. And when she was coming back, she asked people to ask her questions, see what people had questions about. And a lot of people were asking about their conditioning schedules and what their kind of riding schedules were and how it differs over there. And one of the things she said was the biggest takeaway, and that she's going to be applying to her own rides and horses, was that they don't stress this 60-minute ride. They're very much of the mind that if you accomplish what you went out to do in 30 minutes, then you're done. If you accomplished it in that short bit of time, you do not need a ride for any longer. And it's just so nice to hear that from an upper level eventer, to finally prove that what we're saying has some substance to it and that we're not completely crazy.
Well, okay, so this is something that really frustrated me. Now that everyone, I guess the pandemic's not over, but like the lockdown is pretty much over. And one of the things they realized was that they should be working on the horses' gaits and not schooling dressage tests constantly, and that they could do a lot more in a shorter ride. I was like, yes, guys, that is something I don't understand. The barn owner pulled me aside one day and we were talking about like, she's like, oh, you did a really quick ride. You were only out there for like 20 minutes, 25 minutes. And I was like, yeah, because we're done. And she was telling me that like that's something that she had learned from a horse trainer many years ago, that like a 20-minute ride is going to make a lot more progress with your horse's training because that's all the mental capacity they have. Like you've used up their brain power, 20 minutes of hard work, and their brain is done. And so this is something that I think there's a handful of people out there who realize this and are using this method. And it's something that people are starting to discover with the pandemic, that they don't have to like punch out a really long, exhaustive ride. Like I remember being in middle school. I was in middle school, and my history teacher explained to us that when you're studying, the only parts of the studying session that you're going to remember are the first 20 minutes and the last 20 minutes. So don't study for more than 40 minutes. Okay. Why was like, and to me, that actually like makes sense with my ride. Like my horse isn't going to remember every single thing, and they're not going to get the reward. And that's what's so important, is my horse is constantly seeking a reward. I've heard professionals sort of reference this idea before, and it really kind of like has hit home for me personally kind of recently, is that the number of repetitions you do an exercise is going to vary depending on why you're doing that exercise. If you are, say, for example, doing cavaletti work and your horse has done this exercise before, they're familiar with this exercise, it's something they're good at, you can do multiple repetitions for muscle building and muscle development. If the exercise you are doing is brand new, something your horse hasn't done before, you get to do it once or twice and you're done. And the reason is because you want your horse to do it correctly and get the praise. And oftentimes our horse does it mostly correctly or correctly the first time or second time. And what I think happens is so often we ride for perfection and we're constantly like, ooh, he ticked it a little bit. Ooh, this was wrong. Ooh, this was wrong. And we forget that it's like the first time our horse has ever done it. Just reward them for getting through and get out of there. And the same thing is for like leg yielding. If you get 3 good steps of leg yield, get out of there. Stop asking for the whole arena. Stop asking for the moon and just reward your horse for doing it correctly. And by get out of there, I mean, drop your reins, give your horse a full release, walk for a lap, and you can come back and try it again if you want. You're not quite done with your ride. But I think we have this idea that it wasn't perfect, so I'm going to do it 10 more times. Oh, it wasn't perfect, so I'm going to keep going at it. And I think that's just like super frustrating from the training your horse perspective. Now, there are reasons to repeat exercises over and over, but I just find this like get in, get out, be done. Stop nitpicking.
I mean, how many times have you had a jump session or you're doing pole work and your horse ticks the pole right before you're done, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, gotta come through again because we can't finish on a bad note. And it's just the horse doesn't see it that way. That's not how they interpret it.
Exactly. And that's what I think is really hard for people. And I totally understand it. You set up this big, beautiful grid and I'm like, oh, I want to just ride through it 5 times. But my horse nailed it the first 2 or 3 times. I'm done. Like, we have to remember why you're there. Are we building muscle and we need to go through it multiple times? Or are we, is this an exercise my horse is very familiar with, so we can go through it multiple times? Or am I introducing something new to my horse and I need him just to get the basic concept and we can work on the details later?
Right. Your horse is looking for that reward. They're looking for that confirmation that they've moved in the right direction, that they did something correctly. And drilling them over and over again, asking for perfection when they are performing something that you're asking, they don't understand it. They can't comprehend it. It's so frustrating because we constantly want to treat our horses like humans, but they're not humans. They don't think about things the same way we do.
So I watched this YouTube video of this guy who, there is a school of thought that does not believe in petting your horse, which is like a whole, I think there is some logic there, but like also, come on, they're so cute and cuddly. I'm like, why wouldn't you pet them? There is some logic to his argument, I understand. But also that like the only way your horse gets a reward is by you dropping the reins and stopping. You just like petting them on the neck, like doesn't mean much of anything. And often if your horse is relaxed, like a big old good job, boy, like it doesn't, that kind of is jarring. That's not like, that's not a reward that they're looking for. They're looking for them to be done. They want to know that like I did it correctly and now I'm done with this thing. So there is a school of thought that doesn't believe that like scratching your horse on the neck or whatever is a good reward and that you really have to go for that break. And that break, going back to the whole idea of your horse retains information after you're done with the exercise and replays it and works through it. I guarantee you, if you do an exercise, you do leg yields, that's your exercise. You work on it, you do it once or twice, and you come back in a week and try it again, I guarantee you're going to pick up in the same spot. I guarantee you're not going to start, with your horse going, I've never moved sideways before. You're going to be a little bit further down that road, even though you only did it once or twice. If your horse did it right, did it well enough, call it a day. Don't expect perfection that first time.
Right, and I think that's the issue that we're all running into right now. And I will say there's a huge kind of change happening in the horse right now between negative reinforcement and positive reinforcement. And one of the really good things that positive reinforcement people do is that they reward the horse as soon as they make an effort to do the correct thing, as soon as the horse tries to do what they're asking. And this is something that we do really well on with young horses, is that when they try to do the right thing, we immediately reward them. Yet for some reason, when the horse goes along in their training and they become older, we stop. We want to ask for them to move the mountain before we ever want to reward them for taking a step towards it.
Yeah, and I think that horses, even an older trained horse, is still looking for that reward. I mean, that was our issue with Dublin. Like, Dublin wanted all the praise in the world. And I didn't understand that. As a 14-year-old kid, I did not understand what this horse was looking for and what he was wanting. And I started to understand it when I got older and more mature, is that Dublin would do something and he would expect you to be like, woo, that was the best thing ever. And he'd want a big reward every single time, even if he didn't deserve a big reward. Like, maybe it wasn't big reward worthy what you did. He would always be looking for that. And then he would throw these like huge tantrums when you didn't give him the reward. That was his trigger. He didn't get a reward. And so he would throw this huge tantrum because he would think you're being unfair to him. Because he was very, very reward based. Like, he didn't want to work. He wanted the long grain. He wanted to stretch. He wanted to be done. And so he would throw these huge tantrums, and I would get into this fight with him and think that, like, if I win the fight, I won. Like, if I get out on the other side of this fight and he's doing what I want, then I won and my horse learned something. And he didn't. He just got annoyed and frustrated and repeated it next time because the reward came when the fight ended. So he was more willing to get in a fight sooner because that's when the reward came, because I felt like I had won, so fine, we can walk.
I never thought about it that way. I never thought why he was starting the fights.
Yeah, the reward came after the fight.
Well, and there was a time at one point when we couldn't even get on Dublin. Like, as soon as you would get on, he would immediately start that fight. You couldn't get him to walk forward without him throwing a tantrum and getting upset. And it's because he was looking for that fight. Oh my gosh, I've never thought about it this way. There's so many connections happening in my head right now.
Yeah, because at the end of the fight was the reward. We'd all finally be like, whew, over, got my point across. And he would be like, whew, finally, like, get my break. I got my reward. And it was, and the reward, the fight was always triggered because he didn't get the reward he thought he deserved. And what was really frustrating with Dublin was because the way you couldn't, so like once you basically got going and you were riding, you couldn't stop riding him and give him a break because you couldn't restart him. He connected a break with being done, go back to the pasture. And so you wouldn't want to give him a reward other than a trot. A long, stretchy, chewy trot circle was all you really could do. You had to keep going. And it was really frustrating because we just kind of like built this like cycle into him where like he wanted to fight to get his reward and go back to his pasture. But we couldn't give him a reward until the ride was over because we couldn't get him going again. And it was just it was frustrating.
The more you know. I mean, gosh, all our poor horses in the beginning. Oh, all our misinformation and poor understanding.
Yes. I mean, like, that's the thing. Like, I know we started this podcast to, like, learn, like, we were somewhat successful. Like, let's share our secrets. And the truth is, like, we were failures. Let's share our secrets. Like, this is all the hard lessons we learned and why we're sharing them with you, because we learned the hard way that, you can get there, but there's probably some easier ways.
Right. And it feels like this is more of an authentic view of how it actually goes when you're working with horses and training them, because it feels like half the time with books and DVDs, the teachings is they're always presenting it as a straight path, and it's nowhere near a straight path. There's so many struggles and just things that you never saw coming that happen that you never anticipated.
And it's also like, it's nothing like the movies. Like, I freaking hate Hollywood when it comes to animal-human relationships because that's not realistic. Like, my animals do not view me as their best friend and would, kill a bear to save me. Like, they really probably wouldn't.
No.
Like, I know I've seen some YouTube videos of horses doing some pretty cool things and dogs doing some pretty cool things to protect their people. But, like, 99% of the time, your horse really just wants food and probably doesn't really care if there's a cougar trying to eat you. Like, they just don't. Like,
no, the other day, Trin saw a wild turkey out in the pasture. I was feeding her dinner. I was next to her grain and everything, and she was gone across the pasture, said, "Sayonara, that is your problem. I am not dealing with that. You can have all my food. I'm going to stand over here.
Have my grain, have the turkey. You're on your own, kid." And, like, we have good relationships with our horses, and they're nothing like Hollywood relationships. So I think that's also like really confusing when you have young girls, especially, who like want to start riding horses and they don't quite understand why things aren't as like pretty in real life as they are in the movies, and like why does my horse not do these like really cool things I ask them, and why like you're not learning or progressing or have the relationship you want. It's because it's not Hollywood. It kind of has twisted that. Hollywood's twisted a lot of things, let's be honest, not just horse-human relationships, but probably just people-people relationships in general, too. People-robot relationships, too, I feel like have been really twisted by Hollywood.
Well, now that we're significantly off track, I guess we'll get back to the topic at hand, which is how often you should ride your horse, and taking into account some of those factors, the really big factors that immediately affect this, and that should be considered when you're asking this question.
So I think the first, one of the biggest factors when it comes to deciding if you should ride and how long you should ride is really your horse's living situation. And this, does your horse live in a stall 24/7? Is your horse out in a pasture 24/7? Are they in a pasture with friends, or are they in a paddock by themselves? All of those things definitely affect how much movement they're getting throughout the day. So horses in the wild walk about 20 to 50 miles in a single day.
Whoa. They're moving.
Yeah, they're moving. They're moving often, right? Because to find food, to get to water, to just they just don't stand still. And then they're moving 20 to 50 miles a day, mostly walking with some high, bursts of speed. So when we think about how a horse moves in the wild and we think about their living situation, are they in an area in a turnout that they can potentially walk 20 miles a day? Not that they are, but is it big enough that they can constantly be moving? If they're with friends, they're more likely to continue to walk and to engage and to go check out different things. If they're by themselves, they tend to, mosey a little bit slower and be less interested in checking out the neighbors or doing other things. And then are they in an area that's big enough that they can have those occasional bursts of speed where they can run, where they can play, or are they in a small paddock where they don't have that ability to run? So I think those sort of things should be taken into consideration when you decide. If your horse has been locked up all day, you really need to get out there and at the minimum walk in hand for at least 30 minutes and get a mile, right? Like 30 minutes would get you a mile, maybe 2 miles, depending on how fast you and your horse are walking. But that would be it. And that horse doesn't get, so if your horse lives in a stall, they're not maintaining a base fitness. Everything you do is what is maintaining this horse's fitness and their mental health as well.
Yeah, and I think you can kind of tell from our tone that we are very much proponents of having your horses living outside as much as possible. Sometimes your horse has physical disabilities that make it that they can't, or you have to put your horse on stall rest. I understand those times, but if they can live outside, it's best for both their mental and physical health to have them living outside in a pasture.
So I don't have pasture at home. I also don't have horses that need pasture at home, but they have a giant paddock. They have multiple giant paddocks. They get to play. They move around quite a bit during the day. They probably don't hit 20 miles. I'm going to be honest, but they probably don't. I do know there are horses. Most of them are probably that show mare who does not love to leave her stall. I have a horse that does not love to leave her stall. But with friends, and she's comfortable enough with the setup we have, the paddock is attached to the stall. She feels comfortable enough to leave and move around that area. So I do know there are going to be horses that don't love the pasture. They're not a huge fan of it. My horse is afraid of grass, pretty much. I don't know why she's like this. But so I moved her to the barn, and she was out in pasture. She had friends, and she was living outside for a couple weeks, and she went psychotic. And this is something that I did some research online to figure out, why my horse just became psycho.
She just went nuts.
She went nuts, and it actually ended up accumulating, and the climax, whatever, was when she ran through a fence and shredded her chest, and we had to put her in a stall so she could heal. But the reason was she wasn't sleeping outside. So if you are someone who has tried to put your horse out in a pasture and they just go nuts, and every time you try to bring them in, it's just a mess, a hot mess, it could be because they're not sleeping outside. I would recommend, if that's the case, your horse does need to come into a stall at night so they feel comfortable and safe and have somewhere to sleep, and then they can go back out during the day. Try a situation like that if your horse isn't doing well in that pasture 24/7. So that was something I did a lot of research and found was happening to other people and their horses, was that they just can't sleep outside.
Which is, I feel like it's very unique because I've never experienced that. So it's something that I would never have really taken into consideration. I would have always just brushed it off and be like, oh no, you're being a little sensitive with your horse or just over exaggerating it. They're probably fine outside. It's not something that I ever had interactions with. So it's a good thing that, you've discovered this, that some horses really, they don't sleep outside. And so they need to have that place where they can come in and feel safe and secure.
Yeah, because what was happening was I would go to ride her and we would spend maybe 20 minutes lunging and then 20 minutes of cantering and trot sets just to try to get her mind to calm down. So it was I spent 40 minutes just trying to wear her out. And it wasn't working. And then when she finally ripped her chest open, she got back, we put her in a stall for a while, and she fell asleep basically and became a really different horse. And I was well, obviously she likes her stall a lot better. Then unfortunately I couldn't get her back outside. So I spent the next year trying to get her comfortable enough to go back outside, and she doesn't. So I do understand that there are some horses, I get it, I own one, but she came home, she lives at home in a large paddock with friends, she's very happy. So having horses that can move around is super important. And that will also save you on having to ride constantly and every day to exercise them. If they can do some of it themselves, especially if you are someone that works full time, this is great. Having a horse that can move around so that you don't feel guilty that the horse has been locked up all day and you don't have to squeeze in a quick 1 hour ride or 1 hour just of getting them out of their stall. Getting them out of a stall for an hour isn't enough. They really should be out as much as possible.
Do you have anything else that you wanted to add on this, or do you want to move on to kind of the next factor to consider with how often to ride?
We can move on to the next factor. What do you have?
My next one was your goal. What is your goal that you're trying to get to? Are you trying to keep your trained horse in shape? Are you trying to bring along a green horse? Are you simply trying to keep your horse fit enough that you guys can go out and enjoy trail rides or pleasure rides? What is your goal? Are you trying to get in shape for an event that you're going to? Because that ultimately will determine not only how often you ride, but kind of the types you ride or the types of rides that you have.
Yeah, and a lot of that also depends on the type of year or the time of year. Like right now, it's fall going into winter, so a lot of us who've maybe been trying to keep our horses show fit are starting to back off a little bit. We don't need to do all that same conditioning work in schooling we were doing previously. We're going to kind of start to change gear and change focus based on the time of year it is.
When you're considering what your horse needs and what your ultimate goal is, I know there's some out there that do ride 6 to 7 times a week. And I, at one time, was doing that with one of our horses. I was getting ready for my B rating and pony club. I was riding 6 to 7 times a week. And even at one point, I started going out to the barn twice a day to exercise my horse twice a day to get him in what I thought was the good enough condition, good enough shape to be able to maintain what I needed. And ultimately, it just wore him down mentally and physically. And that it doesn't allow the horse's body enough time to recover and recuperate. If you're going to be going to an event for a certain level and you're trying to get your horse in good shape, physically fit, that they can go out and run a cross-country course and not be just dead tired afterwards, 5 times a week is plenty. You just have to determine how you're going to do these rides. So you're 5 times a week. You might have 3 rides of that week are conditioning. 1 is jump and 1 is a flat ride. You just have to structure what your types of rides are alongside of how often you're riding to reach your goal. And that's why it's so important to know what your goal is. Have that in mind and make your kind of your riding schedule around that.
Yeah, and it's also super important to know what your horse's training level is so that you're not over-schooling things. That a lot of times our horses are good at one thing and bad at another. And, if your horse is really good at stadium, you may not need to jump max height stadium courses twice a week. If that's your horse's strong suit, I might not do that, right? Like you could do a couple, if you've got a horse that's really good at stadium, you're really confident, then maybe you do mini courses once a week. And then every other week you do a course that's up to height, or once a month you jump up to height. Some of these things you don't have to over school your horse if they've got it. So we'll definitely, I think, do an episode on this sometime in the future about how horses' brains work and how they learn. But it's really important. Rest is super important in their training and in their learning process. That a horse, if they do a skill, you've introduced something, it's super important for them to take, even just 10 minutes in that ride or that training session and just sit and be quiet. And then it's really important for them to just be left alone, especially when you're working with young horses and introducing new things. Leaving horses alone is super important to the learning process. They have to digest what they learn. They go through a process where they kind of replay what they learned in their heads. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. The horses, if you work on a skill and you let them sit for a while, you come back another day or two, you're going to find that they probably still retained a portion, if not all, of what you've taught them. And that resting is super important in the learning process.
Interesting. I didn't know they kind of go back and think about it. But I mean, it makes sense because some horses, obviously they're retaining the information somehow. It's not like they learn it in just that 1 hour and now they hold on to that. They have to think about it further.
Yeah, and I don't know, I'm not in a horse's brain. I don't know to what detail they replay it. But a lot of times, if you go work through an exercise and the horse then goes and stands for 10 to 15 minutes, what you see happening is them kind of down regulating, calming down and working through what just happened. And like, oh, when I did that, I got a reward and I was done. And obviously they're animals. They're not like logical all the time. We know horses, they're not logical, but there is a replaying process. And I don't know about you, but a lot of horses, like my horse Dublin, he's my old show horse. He hasn't been ridden in probably a year, maybe more. I could pull him out of the pasture today and we could be practicing exactly where we left off. There would be a lot of stiffness. I'm not going to deny that there's not going to be stiffness and that we'd have to do a lot of supplementing work. But we could pick up right where we left off 2 years later.
Yeah, I have the same thing with Trin. She's my mare. She's older now. She's 18. And she knows second level dressage easy. She knows all these different movements and stuff. But I don't have to school them every day for her to retain them. I can pull her out and ask her to do nice, beautiful counter can or serpentines, and she can manage them perfectly. We might not have the right strength developed yet to carry it on through, but she remembers it. She knows how to do it. And so that's why you don't have to re-drill all these skills, these exercises all the time.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Dublin remembers like we were introducing new things. We were working on our third level movements. I know for sure I could pull them out. We'd be rusty, but we would be able to do them all at the same level we were doing them previously. And the same holds true even for Hudson. We haven't, played with tarps and certain things in probably 6 months to more. We were playing maybe 6 months ago. We were playing with little tarps. And this week I pulled out a giant tarp. And in less than 10 minutes, I had all 3 horses walking across the tarp because they had seen tarps before. They remembered it. They remember what you're teaching them. So you don't have to over drill to keep it fresh.
And then I think along with your goal, another tier that I had to think about with how often you should ride your horse is your horse's body type. And by that, I mean, do they have, let's say, a long back in which you need to work on strengthening their back? Or do they have a certain weakness within their body? Or do they have specific limitations to their body like I know Addie has? That is something that you have to take into mind and take into account with how often you're riding them because...
Yeah, absolutely. And we've said it before that we believe that strength training is like most of what you should be doing, especially for those horses that have weaknesses. You should really be focusing on how do we continue to build so that this weakness isn't holding us back. This weakness isn't an issue if that's a long horse or a weak hind end or a weak right leg, whatever it is, a stiffness. Those exercises should be targeted to improve that area so that when you are doing movements and dressage tests and jump courses that you can work more evenly. You can work, both sides equally instead of trying to adjust the weakness and work on the movement because the movement's never going to be of good quality if there's that weakness.
I had a question for you because through everything that I was reading, I kept noticing this common theme that people would mention, these energetic horses or these, if you have a racehorse type, you should be doing yada, yada, yada. Do you think there is a difference in how often you should ride an energetic horse, let's say thoroughbred type versus your quarter horse type?
No. I think that's silly to think that our riding has anything to do with their energy. Like, there is this philosophy sometimes that, like, horses will die if we don't ride them. Like, they're going to hurt themselves if they're not exercised. They cannot be left alone without being worked. And, like, these two things are not related. My horse is not holding up all his energy for my ride. And my horse is not crazy because he didn't get ridden for a couple days. Like if he is getting turned out and his life is totally normal and nothing has changed, his energy has nothing to do with me not riding him. Because that to me says that if that's your belief, then that means your horse is not capable of physically exercising themselves. They do not know how to use their body without a human. And that doesn't make any sense to me. Like my horse knows how to they're fine. If I don't ride them for a week or a couple weeks, I don't have hot horses. I have stiff horses because they didn't work themselves equally.
Yeah.
I don't understand this. I think hot horses it's an excuse for poorly mannered horses, as we said before. It's an if your horse is getting locked up and they're in a stall 24/7 and you haven't ridden in 2 weeks, oh yeah, you betcha that's your problem. Like you did that. But if your horse is out in a pasture, out in an area where they can move around, you not exercising them has nothing to do with their energy level. They may not be focused. They may be distracted and not wanting to pay attention to you, but that's not hot. That's distracted. So I just think that is such a weird excuse and a weird connection people make.
I agree. And I also kind of go along the lines of, so we have different people, obviously. Different people have different energy levels naturally. And I think the same goes to horses. But that's not an excuse for your horse to act up when you're riding. You know, yes, a horse might have more energy to them, but they still need to be respectful when you go to work with them. And you still should be riding relatively the same amount, because there's no way one ride every day is going to dramatically affect your horse's energy levels.
Yeah.
Unless you showed heavily back-to-back 3 days in a row, that's going to affect them. They're going to feel tired because they're going to be sore and their body's going to hurt a little bit. But one ride a day is not going to affect the horse's like ingrained energy level. Like, it doesn't make sense. 1 + 1 does not equal 7.
Yeah, and that's a really good point you just mentioned. Don't confuse a horse that is tired the next day after a hard ride for like, whoo, am I exhausted? Good thing I exercised. They're sore.
Yeah.
Like, they're not like super excited you were here and finally exercised their bodies for them. They're sore. Yeah, they're either going to tiptoe around or they're going to be a little bit more cautious. Or the other part is you got their brains to focus again and you worked their brain, because horses are not always the best at like working their brains fully. But like that's something that's true, right? They get distracted easily. They're children. But like it's a weird connection to make to me. Like I don't get it.
It's a weird one, and I got so frustrated because I think I read probably 6 to 7 different articles, and without fail, every single one of them mentioned if you have a more energetic horse, you might need to be working them more often, even twice a day. And I was like, no, that's not. No. They need more freedom to move.
Exactly. Yeah. They're probably not getting enough turnout. Like, that's honestly the problem is they probably live in a stall or a stall in a tiny paddock and they are not getting to walk around. But that concept that we're the only ones that know how to work their bodies for them is silly. They can figure it out.
Well, I know in Europe and stuff, they, and on racetracks, I don't know the degree they do it with tracks, though I do think it's pretty common. They have the hot walkers, which is a form of exercise and it's not super strenuous on them. And so I do agree with that. If you don't have access to turnout, to use a hot walker just to get them walking and moving, that is good for the brain and good for the mind. But that's along the same lines of you're not exercising them twice a day if you ride them and then also put them on the hot walker. You're letting them move and roam.
Yeah. At a barn I boarded at, we have a hot walker, and I had someone talk to me about how much better their horse was when they, after 20 minutes on the hot walker and then they rode. Like, it was amazing, the difference. Yeah, because your horse finally got out of its stall and was able to move its body. Like, yes. Imagine if your horse could walk around for a couple hours in a pasture first, and then you rode them, you probably would have similar results. Yeah, hot walkers are great. Obviously the horse being able in control of their bodies and being able to do what they want is also better, since they also want to do things like roll and sniff and check things out, and that those occasional bursts of speed they can't do on a hot walker, or should not do on a hot walker. Not that a hot thoroughbred hasn't tried.
I think we kind of already touched on it, is that it's frustrating when I think how often you should ride gets confused with how often you should exercise your horse. Is that you don't have to ride to get them to like stimulate them mentally. I know you were doing the tarp exercise with your horses the other day because you didn't feel like riding, and it worked great for them.
Yeah, it was awesome. So in my mind, there's 3 different types of exercise, or 3 categories of exercise, and your horse should be doing all of these regularly. Mental exercise, that's going to be things like desensitizing, which is tarps, bags, umbrellas, whatever it is. Teaching them life manners and life skills like standing still, clippers, baths, all of those. Like, those are important exercises to do that I think people forget. Things like showmanship, trail in hand, liberty training. I know you do trick training. Anything that like isn't using the horse. Their horse may be moving. They're just not like expected to sweat. At the end of a mental exercise. A lot of this could include things like walking around the property even. So I take my horses for hand walks. We walk, I have a trail I can walk them on. I take them to new parts of the property. I have ditches and banks and things that we walk up and down. But mental exercise, I think, gets so forgotten sometimes. And we owe it to our vets, our farriers, our instructors, and ourselves to work on mental exercise, to work on their manners and their life skills. And, we all want to be able to go to a horse show and walk our horse around the showgrounds without being murdered. So practice that at home. Can you walk your horse all over that property? Can you walk him to the scary backside of the barn? Can you walk him past that scary pile of, burn material, or past the scary trucks? Can you do all of that with your horse at home? If you can't do that with your horse at home and it's not something you practice regularly, then why are you shocked that they're trying to murder you at a horse show? I think mental exercise is something that gets so forgotten, and instead we often quick, I'm going to push out a quick ride, when instead you could take the time and do something different with your horse that you don't have to rush through and they get tons of benefits from. Like I said, this week, I did that. I didn't feel like riding. I wasn't in the mood. The weather's changed. So I threw a giant tarp out in the arena, and the 3 horses and I played with the tarp. And that's great for them.
Right. If your horse isn't going to know that you didn't have time to ride. Your horse is going to know if you push through a quick ride, you guys really got nowhere and just fought with one another the whole time. But your horse isn't going to know if you choose just to brush them and work with them in hand and work on mental exercises. They don't know that you didn't have time to ride that day. They don't know that. All they know is a session that you put in with them.
Right. Horses care about the time you spend with them and the time they get to do things. They don't care that you didn't ride them. They're not heartbroken. Trust me on this one. They're not heartbroken. But I do know, I have Dublin, who is very much anti-work. He just wants to live in his pasture, do his thing, touch him as little as possible at this point in his life. He's enjoying retirement. And then I have Addie and Hudson, who are both my younger horses, who both really, I can tell if I haven't worked with them, if they've been ignored for a week. You can tell. But I don't have to ride them or work them hard to get them focused again and get them in a good mood. Brushing them, leading them, hand walking, just playing with them is enough for them to get in a good mood again, because they like working, both of them. They are very curious horses. They have the best sort of mindset for learning, and because of that, they constantly want to experience new things and see new things. And a lot of times just doing something like pulling tarps out or pulling an umbrella out is enough to stimulate them and have them enjoy the workout.
Yeah. I mean, take Cirrus, for example. He was our very first pony, and when he got to his retirement age, he didn't want to retire. He just wanted to keep on going because he loved going out for his hacks, and he just loved getting out and working and just having the tension, the human interaction.
Yeah, and that's what most of these horses want, is just attention, and you can give it to them in a dozen different ways. They just want attention and to do something. And then, of course, again, there are horses that would rather do nothing. So we won't discredit those horses, because I do have one of them. Poor Dubs. He used to cry sometimes when you rode him. He would make whimpering noises. So
he used to cry at the base of hills. That boy, he hates hills. He would stand at the bottom of a hill, and you could not get him to stop jigging on a trail ride until you came to a hill, and he was like, nope, I'm out. I'll stay here.
Yes. Yeah. He would start. He has this little whimper neigh. So yes, Dublin got an early retirement because there was no point in forcing a horse that has arthritis to keep working. He's happy. He's enjoying his life. I visit him almost every single day. Sometimes, depending on my schedule, I don't make it out to the barn. He gets his grain every single day, even in the summer, even in the winter. I'm out there. He gets brushed. He gets to see me. He's got an easy life. But I do come out. And if I haven't been out for a day or two, oh, you'll know it. He's very upset if I haven't been out for a day or two. They do still want attention, even if they don't want to be worked. So the second type of work that I consider is physical, which is something where your horse is going to sweat, but they're not going to use their brain a ton. And this would be conditioning work. A lot of times if you just are hand walking in the arena, or maybe you're riding around bareback in the arena for 20 minutes, I would lump things like basic flat schools where you're really, mostly on the rail doing simple figures, figure eight, serpentines. It's not a dressage test. It's sort of a basic flat ride. Things that are really repetitive, sometimes, a performance type ride where you're just on the rail, or you do the same ride every day. I know there's a lot of people out there that have a routine that they really like, that works best for their horse or whatever. Once your horse knows the pattern, it's not interesting anymore. And then lunging. I would also throw lunging into just being physical exercise. And this is all important, and you definitely should be doing physical exercise as well as mental exercise. I mean, go back, listen to our last lunging episode on, the goal of what lunging is and the purpose of it. And you'll learn, that's really a physical exercise for your horse's body. And then the last category is mental and physical. So this would be things where like you're schooling, your dressage test, you're really riding those precise movements where your horse has to be correct and you're going to work with them until they're correct. This would also include most forms of jumping, grids, and coursework, cavalettis, and then trail rides. I'd also put trail rides or hacks in this category because your horse may not be like out working super hard, but they often get a sweat from going, even if they're just walking, going up and down hills, walking over logs. They're also going to be seeing a lot of new things, and they're getting that exposure. So that's mental and physical. So when I'm deciding what to do with my horse, I look at these three lists, these three categories, and decide, what haven't I done in a while, or what, should my horse be working on next? These three categories are really important to balance the use of them, and not just only do physical rides or only do mental rides, or mental and physical. If you have a horse that's injured, you might only be doing mental exercise. But if your horse is healthy and you can do all three, you should be doing all three.
It's a very good point and very interesting way to look at it, because a lot of times when I look at my rides, I'll start definitely incorporating that more, is I just try not to have the same ride twice. So if I did a flat ride the day before, I'll either try to do cavaletti work or have a hack or just work in hand. So I kind of unintentionally do what you're suggesting, but it's always been in my mind is I never want to have the same session twice.
Yeah. And I think it also depends on your horse. So like Addie is a horse that does really good in sets of 3. So I'll do the same ride 3 times, or like a version of the same ride 3 times. Then she gets a break for a day or 2 or 3 days, and then we do something new for the next 3 days. So there's ways to you don't always have to be switching, especially, if you know your horse, you know what they're good at, you know what they like. So I usually, when Addie, before I fully understood what was going on with her, we would do our 3 rides, and then our 4th ride would be like a hack or something totally different, our 4th exercise, and then the other 3 days of the week she was off.
That's really interesting, because Trin hates having the same ride twice. She hates, as soon as we go to start doing we had a dressage ride the previous day, and we kind of do flat work once again, is she will just get very frustrated in the middle of it, because I think she thinks that she just doesn't understand. If we were working on something the day before and she accomplished it, she doesn't understand why I'm asking her to do it again. And so she really benefits, and I found she's a lot happier if we are constantly mixing up our rides. So we could not do 3 of the same type in a row. I think she would lose her little marbles.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, so for Addie, it's like a progression. So whatever, so we might be doing flat rides for 3 days, and that 3rd day we're going to be riding, in a frame and really kind of doing more movement schooling, where I guess the first 2 days is developing the suppleness so that we can get to that movement ride, and then she gets time off. She also did great if she got a week off. So I would try to ride her, and then the last week of her shoeing period, because her feet don't grow, so her shoes usually fall off. So the last week or so lifespan of her shoes, I wouldn't ride her. And then after she got new shoes, I would ride her again. And she always did great after she had a week or 2 off. Looking back, that could be because she was having rest time periods to heal her body. But also she was always mentally super sharp and after that week off. So I know for her, she likes to repeat, and then she likes a big break, and then we repeat. But each horse is unique. Each horse is different. I've never ridden a horse like that before. My other horses, Dublin's a little bit more traditional, where you could do whatever. He doesn't really care. It wasn't you could do whatever. He didn't really have a specific pattern he liked the best.
Yeah, I've found Trin's pattern, and it's a little bit different, where I ride every other day, because she does not like being ridden back-to-back twice, and I think it's because of her back. And even though I have gone through the trials and tribulations of getting different saddle fitters out, I now have 2 saddles that are they're made specifically for her, they're flocked, they're fitted to her, her back still gets sore and she still gets a little tight because of just sometimes she's not willing to relax in her loins and stuff. And so having that day off in between allows her to kind of get that rest. And then I'll just give her plenty of massages on her back and then work her in hand and stuff. And it gives her that rest time that she needs. Otherwise, I think she gets a little bit more sore each day as we go along, of course. And then by the end of the week, she's irritated for good reason.
Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, it's super important, like we said, to know your horse. I'm going to say this every single episode, I'm sure. You have to know your horse. And this is really important because all horses are like kids. They all have a different learning style. They all have things they're better at. And I do not enjoy how some trainers work, where they kind of just have a mentality of all horses are the same and they all need to kind of like go through these steps every single day. And this like one size fits all training program, I just don't believe in. All horses are super unique. And that's why you hear people say like that 30-day training program doesn't work for every horse because every horse learns differently. That applies to everyday riding, not just that 30 days starting my horse or 30-day training, that I paid for a trainer to pay for 30 days. We often are very comfortable saying, that doesn't work. That 30-day system doesn't work for all horses. But I think we forget to then apply it after the 30 days and for the rest of the horse's life. That it's not a one-size-fits-all program. You have to know your horse's specific needs, how they think, how they operate, what they like, what they need. And that's what you need to base your training off of. And you take a little bit from every trainer you meet and every person you meet. You take a little bit of information and you put that into a package that perfectly is tailor-made for your horse.
I think we should give the people our numbers, because I know it's frustrating to hear us constantly say, oh, know your horse. It all depends on your horse. But it also is nice to be able to reference how often you ride against how often we ride. So how often do you ride?
So before the lameness with Addie, I was trying to ride everyone at least 3 days a week. So that also included Dublin at a certain point, where I was Dublin 3, NIM 3, Addie 3. That was all I could handle for, and oftentimes those 3 rides were my weekend. Like I would spend my entire weekend riding because I couldn't always do it during the week. If it was summer, I could get an extra ride or 2 in during the week. Right now, Nim is about 2 rides a week and Addie is 1 ride a week. But because of that, my horse is also, and I'm at home, working at home, after work every day, we're doing something. So my horses are either getting brushed, they're either going for a walk, we're playing with tarps. So I do try to do an activity with them every day.
Yeah.
And I usually focus on one horse. So I'm like rotating. I've got 3 horses at home and I rotate through which one, whose day it is.
Okay, that makes sense. With Trin, I try to ride 3 times a week is our pretty standard normal time. If we're getting ready for something, I'll ride her 4 times. But I do every other day. And then almost every day I try to do something in hand with her, very similar to you actually, is where I always try to work with her and just get her mind thinking, and that I'm spending time with her. That doesn't include me riding her, because I notice a huge difference in her attitude when I'm working with her doing both versus when I'm only riding.
Yeah, agreed. Nim, because of his personality, there like really isn't a huge change day to day. He mostly is a horse that like after a week or 2 of not being ridden, he starts to get, or not being paid attention to. Like if he's been neglected, quote unquote neglected for a week or 2 because I've been busy, he starts to get like really mopey and really sad. And oftentimes like he just needs to be groomed and like reminded that he's still important. So that's why I try to like groom my horses. Even if I don't ride them, I try to brush them at least once or twice a week and feel they're getting attention, because that's what a lot of my horses just want attention.
Do you have anything else that you wanted to add that we skipped over, that we missed?
No, I think we hit on it. I guess like the biggest reason we wanted to do this episode is because we want most of you guys to realize you don't have to feel guilty because you can't ride 5 to 6 days a week. Like that's insane. Don't put that pressure on you. People who can ride 5 to 6 days a week for an hour every day, they are like only riding. They are professionals. They have, maybe different sort of jobs than the rest of us. And that is what they can do. And I just don't think it's necessary. And I don't think it's anything to beat yourself up about that you can't do it. go to the barn and enjoy your horse. Your horse doesn't have to be ridden to have a good life. Just enjoy your animal. Even if you're getting ready for a horse show, like, we do this because we love our animals and we want to have fun. We don't do this so we can feel guilty or bad. So that's why we want to do this episode, especially as we head into the fall and the winter. We know riding and getting out to the barn is going to be harder for everyone as it's darker and wetter and colder, and we just want you to enjoy your animals.
Right. At the end of the day, if your horse is happy and healthy, that's all you're going for. That's the end goal. That's the epitome. That's what you want for your horse's life. Yeah, don't let anyone tell you that you're wasting your horse. Don't feel like you're wasting their potential because they can jump super high and you're not jumping them super high. Don't feel that pressure. Give them quality time and attention. And like Kelsey said, just go out and enjoy your horse. So on that note, if you have
get out to the barn, guys. Get out of here. Or just take us with you.
But if you guys have any other topics or questions that you want us to discuss, you can reach out to us on Instagram at mudstudsskullcaps, or you can send us an email at mudstudsskullcaps@gmail.com.
And if you have Apple Podcasts on your phone, that little purple thing, go ahead, subscribe so you don't miss our episodes, and leave us a review. We appreciate it.
Remember, stay safe, stay classy, and stay in the saddle if you feel like it that day. Bye.
Only if you really want to. Bye.